Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Call to order this meeting of the Thompson-Nicola Regional District for Thursday, February the 23rd, 2023. Welcome to the meeting. The TNRD acknowledges that we connect with many First Nations communities across our vast regional district. Today, we are located on the Tk'emlúps to Secwépemc territory, situated within the unceded ancestral lands of the Secwépemc Nation. The TNRD appreciates the partnership that we have with Tk'emlúps to Secwépemc and respects the territory and land on which we all gather today. Would like to welcome two alternate directors today for the District of Clearwater. We have Lynn Frizzle. Welcome, Lynn. And for Area J, we have a familiar face to many, Renee Elliott. Welcome, Renee. So we have a few chairs announcements. First of all, Thompson-Nicola Regional District or Library, is very happy to say you can now let your library card take you to the movies. The TNRL and the Kamloops Film Society, the KFS, have proudly teamed up to offer free movie passes to the Paramount Theater, just in, let me get my bearings, that direction. So you can borrow a family pass from any TNRL branch, including the mobile library, and that will admit a family of up to 4 to the Paramount for a free movie screening. The passes can be borrowed for up to a week. This, of course, comes just in time for the Kamloops Film Festival, which runs at the Paramount from March 2nd to March 11th. So these passes join the other community passes available through the TNRL and will enable everyone to enjoy the magic of the movies for free. So we just a note regarding the recent $1 billion announcement of the growing community funds, which will be allocated to local governments. The province has announced that this funding is forthcoming. But at this time, the TNRD, indeed no local government, has received any further communication as to how much will be allocated to them, when the money will be received, or what the eligibility criteria is. In short, all we know is that next month we will be told we are getting some money, amount as yet to be determined. So when we get that further information and direction from the province, staff will ensure that that information is shared with the board at that time for discussion. And also a reminder to the board with respect to the review of the federal gas tax funds, now known as the Canada Community Benefit Fund, which is being undertaken right now by the board and administration. That during this process, the TNRD is not accepting new applications while the policy is under review. Projects that have already been initiated under the current policy will proceed. So this matter will be on the upcoming March 9th electoral area directors meeting agenda. It will then go to policy committee for further discussion, and then we'll be coming to the board for more discussion. So this past Monday, Family Day, fittingly, there was the grand reopening of the Vavenby rink. The rink was recently refurbished with the help of Canada Community Benefits funding provided by the TNRD. This will enable the rink to be enjoyed by residents of Vavenby in the area for many years to come. And on a more sorrowful note, the TNRD notes with sorrow the passing of two longtime former directors, Pat Wallace and Cliff Branchflower. Pat Wallace was an 11-term City of Kamloops councillor, a friend and a colleague to many, and served as chair of the regional district from 1983 to 1986. She became the first woman to serve as chair of the TNRD, and she left a legacy of strong leadership and of standing up for what she believed in. Pat was well known throughout the city and the region and was a role model to many people. Cliff Branchflower was mayor of Kamloops from 1991 to 1991, succeeding Kenna Cartwright. Prior to that, in 1961, he was elected to the local school board, which was then known as SD 24. and served 15 non-consecutive years as a school trustee. In 1980, he was elected as what was then called an alderman to the City of Kamloops Council and served in that position until he became mayor in 1991. Both Pat Wallace and Cliff Branchflower were honored with the Freedom of the City of Kamloops, which is the highest honor bestowed upon a city by that municipality. So upcoming meetings and events. March 8th, there is a Finance Committee meeting. Also on March 8th, Invasive Plant Management Committee meeting. March 9th, Electoral Area Directors Committee meeting. March 9th, regular board meeting. March 17th, strategic planning session. And of course, many people here will be going to the LGLA Leadership Academy, which are newly elected officials academy taking place in Kelowna next week from the 1st to the 3rd. In your blue folders, you will find a letter from Tara Richards, Deputy Minister of the Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness. It's a follow-up to a meeting that was held with Minister Bowen Ma on February 1st. The letter sadly arrived too late to go on this meeting's agenda, but electronic copies are also being forwarded to you. Okay. So additions to or deletions from the agenda, a note that item 9.1.3 has been deleted from the agenda and it will be brought back to the board at a future meeting. Are there any other additions to or deletions from the agenda? Seeing and hearing none, a motion please to adopt the agenda as amended. Hey, eager. Further discussion on the question? All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. We have the minutes of the regular board meeting of February 2nd, 2023.
Move the minutes.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. Are there any errors or omissions? Seeing and hearing none. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. We have delegations, invited presentations, item 6.1, building infractions 6348 Pinecrest Drive. Is there anyone here to speak to this?
There are no representations, Chair Roden,
No reference for any of them?
for any of them.
For any of them. All right. So we skip merrily along to unfinished business. 7.1, building infraction, expired permit 6348 Pinecrest Drive, and we do have a recommendation. Thank you, Director Laird and Director Ranta. Is there any discussion? No, on the question then, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Item 7.2, another building infraction, 4221 Dixon Mountain Road.
Move the recommendation.
Vice Chair Smith and Director Newstadter, thank you. Any discussion on this? Nope, seeing and hearing none. On the question, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Item 7.3, a building infraction 1557 Birch Island Lost Creek Road.
The recommendation.
Thank you, Director Sarai. Director Thorpe seconds. Discussion on this? All right, and I think this is a testimony to the very fulsome reports that are provided by the Planning Department. On the question, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. 8.1, the revenue anticipation bylaw number 2802.
Second.
Director Rain and Vice Chair Smith, second and or move in second. Discussion. Or does anyone have any questions on this? No questions, no discussion. All right, on the motion then, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? And that one is carried. Oh, so that was recommendation 1. Recommendation 2, that it be read a third time. So moved, Director Smith, second by Director Stankey. Thank you very much. No discussion on the question that it be moved read a third time. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. And recommendation 3, that the bylaw be adopted. Director Thorpe and Director Smith second. Thank you. Discussion? On the question, all those in favor, opposed if any? That is carried. Right, on to reports, item 9.1, boundary review and study, item 9.1.1, and I am going to pass the microphone, metaphorically speaking, to Corporate Officer Campbell.
Thank you, Chair Roden. I expect that many of you may have some questions for staff and we'll do our best to answer them. And I hope the report provided you with enough background and context. But I just wanted to ensure that the board, it was clear that the board's not being asked at this time whether or not the TNRD should actually be restructured, but rather just to provide direction on a review and a study of the TNRD boundaries, which may or may not result in recommendations that would potentially involve some form of a restructure. And so as it noted in the report, the previous board did give their support in principle to a review, but it was done in a way that it was not done in a way that met the ministry's requirements to initiate a study, which is why you see this report and recommendation before you today. That all said, a review and a study of this nature would be fairly significant undertaking. So we just want to ensure that the board understands that. And most importantly, the desire to do this really needs to come from you as the elected officials of the TNRD. So we want to ensure that we're acting on the will and direction of the board before moving anything forward.
Thank you. And if I may, Corporate Officer Campbell, I just want to ask for clarification that really we have two options. Either we move the recommendation presented or we decide not to move ahead with the review in any form. There is no middle path. There is no more moderate approach we can take. Yep, thank you. First of all, sorry, you're first, definitely. Otherwise, I know what you'll do to me. That look, but anyone else have questions? I'm just going to start taking names right now quickly. So I saw Director O'Reilly, Director Smith, Director Graham, Director Ranta. Oops, Houghton, not Smith, sorry. So I've got Directors Elliott, O'Reilly, Houghton, Graham, Ranta. All right, Director Elliott.
Thank you, Madam Chair, is it? Thank you. I would just like to speak on this as being part of the last board meeting or board of directors. I was not happy with it at that time. I've read the report. I think this board probably has some issues that need straightening out before they head into trying to change the boundaries of the regional district. We are 55 years old this year. So far, we have managed to become quite complacent with all the services that we provide for all the rural areas. And regional districts were originally to provide services for rural areas that were not part of a municipality. This regional district has done that very well over the last few years. Boundary extensions provide a lot of time, effort, finances, things that I don't think our tax-paying public needs to get into at this time with the recession coming on, the kind of weather that we've had across this regional district, the fires, the floods, etc. I don't really think they need anymore. Thing around our farming communities is always, if the fence isn't broke, don't fix it. And I think that that applies here. Thank you.
Director O'Reilly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I'd like to start by moving the recommendation, and then I'd like to speak to it, please. Thank you. Certainly, I think Director Elliott and I had these conversations going back with the previous board. To say that, if the fence isn't broken, don't fix it, is the same as saying, well, this is the way we've always done it. And for me, that's not essentially an appropriate answer. our job around this board table is to provide the best level of governance for our citizens as we can. Are we doing that right now? I don't know. I think it warrants at least an exercise to explore. Are we providing the best governance possible? Maybe we are. If not, what are potential options? We're not committing to restructuring the boundaries here today. We are asking, saying, look at this. And I don't think you have to look much further than attachment A in your report that states how many directors we have, what our population is for our size and the land size. And so again, it's going back to saying, well, we've done this since I believe it was the mid-70s, that this is the way it's always been. And when we look at the provincial government who's committed to implementing UNDRIP in the province, we know there is going to be First Nations voting representation around this table. We know our populations in the towns and cities are getting larger, as well as the electoral areas that are going to, by letters of patent, increase the amount of members around this board table. And that's excluding First Nation representation. So if we look at fiscal responsibility, this boardroom itself will not be big enough. And we will need to expand and grow and find something else. I think it warrants at least an exercise. And the fact that the province is splitting the cost with us is also a very big bonus. And to be clear as well, and it's detailed in the report, that this is going to be a 2-year process at best. And when we started this going back 6 or 9 months ago, that was the conversation. It wasn't to fix it for that board at the time. It's looking at the long-term vision of the TNRD and how this level of government operates, and can we do it better? And maybe we can't, and that's what the report will come back. But I think we owe it to our residents to explore that option. So I will be supporting this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Houghton.
Well, Renee or Director Elliott sort of said some of the things I was going to say is, I'm being new to this game. We've got a 44,000 square kilometer landmass that we try and look after, both within municipalities and within our electoral areas. Right now, I think we've got 10 electoral area representatives and 17 municipal representatives. And I just don't understand what we're trying to change, or we're just trying to have a look at it. I don't think as electoral area representatives, we can decrease, because we have very large electoral areas amongst ourselves. And if we get other representation around the table, what is it going to do to the electoral area representation? Like Renee said, that we were elected to represent the rural part of these ridings. I'm just unclear of where we want to go before I make my mind up. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Graham. For me?
Thanks through the chair to Director Houghton. So we don't know where this is going to go right now. The intent is only to initiate a study. The terms of reference of that study and review are still to be determined. And this board would have some input on what the terms of reference look like, as well as staff and the ministry. We don't know what the outcome of the study would be. Like there's all kinds of, and I think I outlined some of the potential options that could result from the study, but it's not going in any one particular direction. All this would be is initiating a review to look at the TNRD boundaries, the TNRD services, and TNRD governance, and looking at whether or not it's operating at its best in terms of serving the residents, in terms of services, in terms of governance, and is there a different way or a different structure to do that. That makes sense. So very preliminary. No decisions on what the TNRD might look like, or what a restructure could look like, or if there even would be a restructure.
Thank you very much. I have Director Graham and then Directors Ranta, Stamer, and Bass.
Thank you, Mrs. Chair, Madam Chair. First of all, I failed to see where the benefit is in performing this study when nothing is broken, and I'm sorry, without saying any disrespect for Councillor of the City of Council, Kamloops. I'm a fan of, if it's not broken, don't fix it. And a corporate officer says that we don't know where it's going, but why waste the time and the money to do it if we don't know where it's going? We have no point. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Graham. Director Ranta.
Seen thousands of studies over the years and not necessarily going to change anything, but it may change something. In looking at this regional district, I've always scratched my head and wondered, what the hell is Lillooet doing with Squamish Lillooet? That's got to be a pain in the butt to administer from Whistler or Pemberton or something. And I think Lillooet is more closely aligned with Lytton than it is with the rest of its regional district. So I guess in the discussion with the provincial staff, has there been any consideration of expanding a portion of the TNRD to include the part that has Lillooet and maybe breaking the TNRD into two pieces or something like that? Are those possibilities down the road?
Through the chair to Director Ranta, those could be, but certainly we haven't had those discussions with the ministry because the ministry isn't in a place to say what's best right now until the results of a study are brought forward. So that would be the purpose of a study and a review.
But the study would include those sorts of options.
That those certainly would probably be options that would be informed part of the study.
Sweet.
Thank you, Director Stamer.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just trying to finish writing everything down that I had to say. First up, I just wanted to comment on what Director Riley made a couple of comments on, and I wanted to comment on that. And first up is that unless the majority of this board agrees to include First Nation representation on this board, and how would that look with so many separate First Nation organizations in our region? Knowing we already have 27 directors on this board, and what opportunities do we have on being a member of their boards or their organizations? I support a review and study as the numbers suggest. We are one of the largest regional districts in the area, and population. And if we can use funding from our Canada Community Building Fund, I don't see any reason why we wouldn't entertain a review or study just to see exactly where we are and whether we want to continue forward when the questions keep being asked. Do we have a level of service that we want to be able to maintain? And going forward, what does this organization look like? As Director Randa said, do we want to expand it? Do we want to contract it? Or as Director Graham and Elliot have mentioned, that it seems to be just fine. I'd like to be able to know going forward that it is fine. And we all agree that this is the size that we'd like it to be.
Thank you, Director Stamer. Director Bass.
Thank you. Director Stamer took most of my questions, but so I'm loath to raise a hypothetical, but I'm going to the corporate officer. If the world changed today and all non-treaty bands would have to join a regional district, what would we look like tomorrow? Because that's where we're headed. So I'd like to see the future first, and then I have a comment.
Through the chair to Director Bass. So this board has context, and I believe I've addressed this in the past. So the Local Government Act currently does not permit non-treaty, non-modern day treaty First Nations representation on regional district boards. And there are very few treaty First Nations in BC and none in the TNRD. And so the government has new legislation to enact UNDRIP. And as a result of DRIPA, the new legislation, they have developed an action plan. And one of the action plan items is to have First Nation representation on regional district boards. What that means, we assume that means that they will change the legislation to allow all First Nation representation on regional district boards. And there are over 25 First Nations in the TNRD. And so we don't know what that would look like. That's probably a question for the province once those potential legislative changes are made. In the meantime, the province certainly encourages us to find ways to have representation on our regional district boards and committees in a non-voting advisory capacity. And that's up to this board to provide direction to staff on what that looks like. And that's up to the First Nations in the TNRD to tell us what they would like to see in terms of representation on our board. But in terms of actual changes to the legislation, that's a few years away, but we certainly expect that will happen.
Okay, I'm going to skip my comment and ask a second question. Assuming that this all goes forward and the bands become part of the regional district, would they then also become members of the hospital board?
I believe so, but again, that would be a question for the province at the time.
Yeah, it's all based on legislation, but I think that would answer another one of the concerns that the hospital board chair has had. All right, I think this is I don't know if we're broken or not. I'd like to know if we're broken. I have felt we were broken in the past 4 years, to be perfectly honest. And I agree with Director Ranta. There's nothing to lose here. We just find out, and maybe we'll find out we're better than we think we are.
Thank you. I have Directors Thorpe, Getz, Middleton, Vice Chair Smith, and Newstater. So Director Thorpe.
Thank you, Chair. Through the chair, I have a couple of questions. Realistically, given that it's taken us, yeah, it's on. It's probably my voice. Okay. Realistically, given that it's taken this many months for it to get this motion to come this far, what impact is it going to have on services with our staff that are currently struggling to meet the services of our residents? I mean, how do we have the staffing to do this realistically without impacting the services we're offering? And secondly, given that every other regional district in this province is going to be in the same boat as us, if and when First Nations come on board, is not something going to have to be done at the provincial level then, because it's going to impact literally every regional district? Thanks.
So in terms of staff capacity, if the direction and will of the board is that we undertake the study, then we will dedicate, and see if Hildebrand can speak to that, dedicate resources. I don't anticipate staff who provide direct service delivery to residents to be involved in this directly. I would expect my department and office would be quite involved in this and working with the ministry, as we've already begun those discussions. And so, we will make the resources available if this is what the board wishes. And I don't feel, and CEO Hildebrand can comment, that will impact service delivery to our residents at all. And then your second question, sorry, it was what the province may do in terms of other regional districts in terms of support. I mean, we would certainly hope that as a result of any legislative changes and an increase in our board, that we would have some support around that. But again, it's such an unknown at this time that I don't know.
Okay, thank you. And CEO Hildebrand.
Thank you, Chair. Lots of good discussion. A couple of things I'd like to say. So number one, it is going to impact staff to some degree. How we go about doing that is going to be the difference. It's whether we need consultants, whether we need some assistance to get us to the point we need to get to. That'll all be in the report. The financials will be done around it and what it's going to cost and that sort of thing. But I do want to say, just Director Ranta mentioned too, a study is a study. Like any good business, if you're always looking in the mirror, you're always looking at what you're doing well, what you could be looking at doing better. So that's my view on it as well, as it doesn't hurt to look at it. We always need to reflect on how we're doing and how we're delivering, because sometimes we get tunnel vision a little bit. We need to make sure that we're looking kind of from a broader perspective.
Thank you, Director Getz.
Thank you, Madam Chair, to the corporate services. Just a question with studies. There's always a cost associated with the studies. So there's nothing worse that taxpayers hate than having a study that gathers dust on a shelf after it's over. So I was just wondering what ballpark the study might cost. And that's pretty much my only question. Thank you.
Through the chair to Director Getz. So we actually don't have a ballpark. So you will have seen in the report that a few regional districts have undergone studies in the past, back in the 90s, but nowhere near of the nature that we would be proposing. And I did ask the ministry if they could sort of ballpark what a cost might be, and they said they couldn't. That would all be determined based on what the terms of reference involved. But as noted in the report, the ministry will cost share the cost of the study.
Sorry, thank you. One last comment is, I feel like it's, we need to be proactive. We need to be kind of leading edge once in a while. And if it is going to happen provincially, when it's going to change this, why would we not want to get in front of it? Because if it's going to change, there's going to be a backlog of regional districts that are going to be looking for these services. And I'd rather be leading that and being prepared versus chasing it from behind.
Thank you, Director Middleton.
Thank you. I think my question was mostly answered. Thank you very much. It was related to cost. If we approve and decide we want to go ahead with this study, would the TNRD be coming back to us with an estimated cost that we could then vote again on if we suddenly say, like, I think is this, north of 50 or is it north of 100, where are we at, sort of thing, for what might be a cost? And some might think, well, if we can get what we're looking for $50,000, then I'm all in, that's great. But if it's going to cost 100,000, maybe I'm not.
Through the chair to Director Middleton, yes, absolutely. This is one of many steps. As you'll see in the report, the board first needs approval from the minister to even initiate the study process. And then once a terms of reference is developed, the minister actually needs to sanction the study. So there's a lot of ministerial approval involved. And so when we have a better idea of what the cost of the study would be in a terms of reference, absolutely, we would bring it back to this board.
Supplemental, is there a cost to even getting them to give us a price?
No, there's not. No.
They're not asking us to put 10% down or anything. Okay. CEO Hildebrand.
Just to add to that, we would bring back a proposal that would be as fulsome as we can actually have it. And perhaps there's other grant funding, if they're going to split it 50-50, maybe there's another way to fund this in another way as well. So all that exploration will happen.
Vice Chair Smith.
Yes, thank you. And Director Bass already sort of alluded to my question. I was wondering whether it would also, we would be looking at a review of the hospital board as well at the same time, and how that would affect the hospital board if it's completely separate.
Through the chair to Vice Chair Smith, it would be separate. So the hospital district board is governed by the Hospital District Act, not, there's elements of the local government that apply, but it would be separate.
Director Newstater.
Mine is a comment, not a question. I agreed with much of what Director Ward said about the study. I think that that's valuable insight, but I also think that it's important to note that since colonization, non-Indigenous people have had an excessive influence and overrepresentation in First Nations spaces. And that's still reflected in the Indian Act today. So the question of whether, quote unquote, our representation in quote unquote their space should be is not ours to ask. And I think that we need to prepare ourselves to welcome our Indigenous friends and neighbors into these spaces and to reach across that aisle. And that is our work to do. And I would just echo Director Ranta's statement and saying, don't be scared. And I will also be supporting this motion.
Thank you. I have Directors Hall, Laird, and Sarai. And then unless anyone has anything pressing they need to add, I'm going to call the question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of items from a new set of eyes as a new director. Preliminary exploration is to identify what the problem is in the review and why the review is required. And I have to agree with CEO Hildebrand. I mean, it's time to be innovative. It's time to be bold and look at how we're servicing, the needs of the individuals and the businesses within the TNRD. And I'm always said, knowledge equips us to provide actual better service and better opportunities. So I agree with what Councillor or Director O'Reilly had talked about, and I'll be supporting this motion.
Thank you, Director Laird.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I find it very interesting that the provincial government is recommending that we as an elected board that represents our areas are being asked to invite First Nations to come down and be part of our board. I don't hear the provincial government suggesting that they should come in and be part of the provincial government. I'm concerned that they're sort of missing a step. We'll be starting, according to their recommendations, that we start encouraging First Nations come to our elected board, that I don't hear the provincial government saying the same thing, asking the First Nations to come down and be part of the provincial government. And they are already a big part of the provincial government, but the provincial government hasn't asked the same as what we're asking. And I have concerns that the cost attached to it, no matter what direction we give our staff, it takes staff time. Instead of possibly working on emergency management planning, our staff, some of our staff members will be working on boundary expansion and everything else that we need doing. To me, emergency planning is one of the key things that we should be dealing with. Boundary expansion and looking at good governance is two different things as far as I can see. Good governance, we can do that without having the boundary expansion cost. And I do support looking at governance and how we're managing right now, but I won't be supporting anything to do with the boundary expansion. It's very expensive. It's totally unknown what the cost is going to be. And I say, be careful what you ask for, because you might not like what you get. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Sarai.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just going to put another hat on the SILGA. I'm executive, second vice president of SILGA. We're having the same discussions there, and we represent 38 communities, villages, and districts. And the First Nation piece there is all the RDOs in our district. We're struggling with the same thing. There are neighbors to all these municipalities and districts. To bring them in is an added voice. To bring them in is it's our duty. They belong at that table. Those days of us and them is over, in my opinion. We need to work together, and I totally, in good governance, I support Director O'Reilly's look at this. We need to be proactive instead of reactive. All that can come out of this is good, whether we stay where we are, or we grow, or we realign our boundaries. That'll come out of the study. It's still your decision at the end of the day what you want to do. But it's on us as good governance to find out what our options are and not be dictated to by the provincial government. And to Director Laird's comment that there's no First Nations representation at the provincial level, I'd have to disagree. There is representation there. What I don't see is where the local neighbors, our neighbors are local First Nations. And I think we have to get to the point where they're included in our decision-making. They have a seat at the table, and because together we're stronger. So I will support Councillor O'Reilly's decision.
Corporate Officer Campbell.
Thank you, Chair Roden. I just want to take a moment to respond, if I may, to Director Laird's comments and related to Director Sarai's, as I just want to make sure that I'm not misspeaking on behalf of the province. Like, I'll get a phone call later. So the province is not making this board or any regional district do anything when it comes to First Nations. So they have adopted the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, which we're the first province in all of Canada to actually adopt a piece of legislation that solidifies our commitment to UNDRIP. And so as a result of that, they've developed an action plan. So I don't want to speak on behalf of the provincial government, but they have significant action items on how to align their legislation and their work to ensure that it is in line with the spirit of reconciliation, and they're working with First Nations. When it comes to local governments, there's a specific line item given to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs. We are, as local governments, creatures of the province. We're created by the province, and a lot of our decision-making, a lot of things that we do need to be approved by the province. And so the ministry does have oversight of regional districts and municipalities. And so one of those action items is increasing and including First Nation representation on regional district boards. And so there's just an encouragement that until and if once the legislation is updated, it will be up to First Nations whether or not they want to be represented on our board. It won't be up to us. They have to come to us and say that, yes, I want to have representation on the board. So in the meantime, until that legislation is changed to actually allow that to happen, the province is just encouraging local governments, if they wish, and First Nations, if they wish, to come together and determine whether or not there are other ways that First Nations can be included in local decision making. So I hope that makes sense. And this board can expect a future report with more details on First Nations engagement and relationship building in the future. So there'll be an opportunity to talk about this in a lot more detail.
Okay, Director Rain.
Thank you. I can tell you that the government study for Sun Peaks was about $75,000 in that range, just for Sun Peaks. Most of that cost was picked up by the province because we obviously weren't a municipality, had no ability to pay our side of the bill. So it isn't inexpensive to do this. I mean, my guess would be we're talking in the hundreds of thousands by the time it's all finished. The question I do have on this proposal, are we talking just about boundary review or service review? Or are we really reviewing? What are we reviewing? I mean, boundary only or boundary services? What was the original intent?
And if I may, I was going to segue and say I was going to give Director O'Reilly the last word because he is the one who brought the original notice of motion, which is what we're all talking about here today. So Director O'Reilly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through to Director Rain and I guess the rest of the directors. Ultimately, it's looking at a boundary review to let us know if we are providing the best level of service, fiscal responsibility, and governance overall to our residents. And to Director Laird's point, when we're talking about being fiscally responsible and staff time with natural disasters, I 110% agree with that. The question is the way this is set up now with the size of our boundaries, are we providing that best service that we can for emergency management as an example? We don't really know. And frankly, if there's anybody here that knows why these lines were drawn on the map in the early 70s that show us that it's reflective of what's providing the best service today, I would love to hear it today. I'd love to hear a director speak to that. If not, and there's questions, are we doing this? Are we providing the best service and being fiscally responsible and best governance? I encourage you to vote in favor of this, to at least look and start on this study. And, you know, there's one thing for studies to be gathering dust and they sit there, but there's another thing to just go at something without any study or any research at all and be in the completely wrong decision. So I think it's worth it for us to learn and educate ourselves, and then we can make a decision as a board of what we want to do. So I encourage you to vote today in favor. Thank you.
Thank you. So we do have a recommendation, and that is that the TNRD Board of Directors seek support from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs for a boundary study. And I'm going to call the question, and I would just ask whichever way you are voting to please keep your hands in the air for a few moments because it could be a close vote. And we do need to record who voted which way. Corporate Officer Campbell.
Chair Roden, would you mind just calling out the names of directors so that the recording secretary can record that?
So on the question, all those who are in favor of the recommendation. All right, we have directors Hayward, Hamer Jackson, Lepso, Frizzle, Stamer, Rain, Roden, forgot my own last name, Roden, Vice Chair Smith, Sarai, Smith, Hall, and Morris, Onslow, I'm sorry. Morris, O'Reilly, Stankey, Getz, Middleton, O'Connor, Ranta, Sow, Newstater, and Bass. Did I get Morris? Director Morris, did you vote in favor? Okay, Director Morris. All those opposed, please raise your hands. We have opposed Director Houghton, Director Graham, Director Thorpe, Director Elliott, Director Laird. Have I missed anyone opposed? Thank you. That motion passes. We move on to item 9.1.2, Canada Community Building Fund, Loon Lake Community Hall upgrades. Pardon me? Do I have someone to move the recommendation? So moved. That was okay. Thank you, Director Smith. Do I have a seconder? Director Getz, I saw your hand first. Any discussion on this item? expend. This is item 9.1.2. This is Canada Community Building Fund for the Loon Lake Community Hall. So this is an additional expenditure of up to 25,200 on top of which will take the TNRD's contribution to the maximum of 174,000 for this individual project. So we do have it moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Discussion, questions, comments? No, and I just would like to thank the Loon Lake Community Recreation and Agricultural Society for raising $10,000 towards this project. They do have a number of projects. I was asked to be one of the judges for their photograph calendar contest, which is one of their many fundraisers. And so they were able to contribute 10,000 to this. So on the question, then all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Thank you very much. Item 9.13 has been deleted from the agenda as detailed at the beginning of this meeting. So we move on to 9.1.4, Community Emergency Preparedness Fund for Emergency Operations Center. And there is a recommendation. Director Ranta, thank you very much. Second, Vice Chair Smith, discussion. Any discussion, any questions? For Mr. Vieira, who is here, eager and anxious and waiting to answer your, no, you're not. All right, on the question, then all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Item 9.1.5, Canada Community Building Fund, pooled funds, library renovation. We have a recommendation. Director Bass moves the recommendation. Okay, it's just, do we have a seconder for that recommendation? Director Sarai, thank you very much. Discussion. CFO Fox, would you like to speak to this before the discussion?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. If I can, I just wanted to discuss this one as it's the first time that I've kind of brought one of these forward. And I wanted to give a little bit more context. So as the administration with the gas tax funds, we go directly to the policy that the board set. So in the policy, Federal Gas Tax Funds, Community Works Fund, policy 5.1.5, in support of looking at transferring grant funds from the gas tax program to support the library renovation. We started discussion on this early in draft 1 budget. So in order to do that, looking at this, the allocation of funds under gas tax, first 10% is allocated to a pooled fund available for use on projects with broad regional benefits. And I thought I would bring that forward because I don't know if that's commonly understood by the directors. The remaining 90% is allocated on per capita basis to each electoral area based on most recent census using the census voting strength reports published by the province of BC. Lastly, each electoral area will contribute an extra $1,500 per year to the allocation towards electoral area B. And further, it says, despite this allocation process, federal gas tax funds belong to the TNRD as a whole. As such, electoral area directors are free to redistribute their funds allocated to the area they represent to any other area of the TNRD or to the pooled fund as they desire. I just want to clarify that the funds we're looking to reallocate are directly from the 10% allocated pool funds and not from any of the electoral area funds. And we're not asking any electoral area at this time to redistribute their funds. The use of the funds, all federal gas tax funds must be used in accordance with the eligibility criteria contained in the master agreement with UBCM and any subsequent changes or updates thereto. The Director of Finance is responsible to determine whether specific projects or proposed expenditures meet the eligibility criteria, but may consult with UBCM as necessary in making such determination. So I thought that was important to note because with that one, with a new fresh set of eyes looking at these numbers, I thought maybe there was a benefit, even though that project was getting underway, to talk to UBCM and see if we could, because if we could redirect these funds, it would free up COVID funds, which have a broader use. And I could use the broader use of the COVID funds to possibly redirect those and support other areas of the operating budget. So right now in the gas tax funds, there's approximately $3.8 million sitting there. The pooled fund has $503,000. And the remaining amounts are broken down between the electoral areas. So using the 235 of available pooled funds would allow admin then to use the 235,000 of COVID funds to reduce the one-time cost increases in the IT department. That's where I targeted, because that's where we've presented to the board the largest increase is coming from admin and IT costs surging. So we thought that would be a good reallocation. This gas tax policy supports the allocation of the 10%. So there are those funds available. By using the community building funds on the TNRD owned assets and the capital projects that are required to support TNRD as a whole, then we're able to reduce the amount of taxation in many cases to support these projects. So the taxation we would be reducing in the IT budget would actually be a tax reduction to TNRD as a whole, the municipalities as well as the electoral areas. So currently in draft 1 of the budget, we have capital needs of approximately $23 million that was presented. And also what was presented, thank you, was the requirement of the reserves of $951,000 to support that, as well as $1.6 million of taxation to support that. So as administration coming in and trying to make sure that we're looking at all avenues of taxation reduction, some of the opportunities are looking at these gas tax funds to offset capital costs, which right now we're using some taxation to support those capitals. So that's one of the strategies that I'm looking at going forward, and for this next budget, the next version of the budget that's coming to you guys. So I just wanted to kind of give you guys an understanding of my process that kind of went into why I'm bringing this forward. It was a little bit of a long story, but being new, bringing these things forward, and a new board, not having much conversation about the use of gas tax funds and COVID funds, I just wanted to highlight my reasoning behind it. So I will leave it at that.
Thank you, CFO Fox. And just for clarification, when we talk about renovations to the main Kamloops Library, this is not renovations to the actual library building. This is renovations to the distribution portion of the library service, where the books come in from all the different branches and then are sent out to all the different branches. So this is a renovation of a service that serves the entire regional district.
Thank you, Chair, through to the board. Absolutely. This is part of a large project that was brought to the board to renovate and move part of where the library sits on the 3rd floor to the 2nd floor, then opening up more room on the 3rd floor. So phase 2 of that project, making sure that there's space for staff and EOC. So there's kind of 2 phases of that. This reallocation is specifically for the library, which is the regional piece of that. Yes.
So I had Director Laird with his hand up. I had Director Stamer. Is there any? Oh, okay. Director Houghton, Director Elliott. So I have Laird, Stamer, Houghton, Elliott. Anyone else wish to speak to this at this moment? All right, we'll go ahead with Director Laird.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have concerns around this particular item coming on to the board. The EA directors have not had an opportunity to meet with the staff and have any sort of idea of our community gas funds, where they're at as individual EA directors. We've asked for the information to find out exactly what's in our accounts currently, and that hasn't been forthcoming. I was now that I've heard the explanation as to where and what the funds are being used for and where they're coming from. This is all new information for me. I've sat at the table for 4 years and did not know that we had a separate fund coming from EA directors and the Canada Building Fund that went to the TNRD to spend as the board saw fit. So I was going to make a deferring motion, but when I hear exactly what has been explained, I can't do that because it basically flows with the recommendations coming from the gas tax funding. But the EA directors definitely need direction, information, and the amount of funds that are in our individual accounts to be shared amongst other EA directors for projects or projects in our communities. And it sounds like we will be having that fairly shortly. And there's also talk of a new policy coming forward on how TNRD will be looking at spending future community building funds. So I guess my concern is the fact that the EA directors have not had information until I had more information today than I've had in the last 4 months. And we had to wait until we had this board meeting to find that out. I know it's and there's 10 EA directors. It's not hard to call us down and have a meeting and let us know what's going on with our funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Laird. Director Stamer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Director Laird answered one of my questions in as much as how much information the electoral directors have on this, but I'm a little bit uncomfortable spending any money from the Canada Community Building Fund until I know exactly how much we have in there and how much is allocated to our area directors for exactly what Director Laird is pointing out. And we haven't, had our final budget meetings to date. I'm wondering why we have this recommendation today without knowing exactly what we have in those accounts and how they're going to be distributed. Did I miss something?
CFO Fox.
Thank you, Chair, through to the board. So unfortunately, with coming in October and taking this over, right during budget and year end, it hasn't allowed a lot of time to go through, review, and make sure that all of the information is within the spreadsheet. So due to a lack of resources is the only reason why we haven't been able to have a separate meeting that brings all the information maybe that the directors are requiring. Although I didn't get an action item asking me to bring this forward at any time prior to today. So my apologies if I've missed that. What I would say during year end, what we're doing is taking the overall allocation, making sure that all the amounts spent throughout the year have been taken into consideration and putting that out. So I think it's my understanding that when the money comes in, the EA directors are made aware, and maybe this happened last year, I'm not 100% sure, but my process would be that the allocation that comes in is distributed to the EAs, and that information is provided to the EAs to understand their allocation. The amount that comes in, so for an example of $1,065,000 that would come in, 10% following the policy right off the top goes to the pooled funds. The remaining 90% is then allocated and distributed to the other EAs. So the amount disclosed in the budget, I think, was $1.2 million for 2023, and has since been updated to the amount from the federal Community Building Fund website. So right in the budget, it states that $1.2 million is coming in from gas tax, and within the policy, it describes how the funds are distributed. So although that money has maybe not been given to you in a schedule over the last few months, there is the information available that does not have the year-end reconciliation amounts in there. So that information can be given out. And there's, like I said, other than the $503,000 sitting in the pooled funds, the remaining portion of that is allocated out between the other EAs. I would say it didn't come forth today because I'm following a past practice in reporting that's coming forward, and I'm not trying to do anything different. So for the same reason, the previous report that was just approved for the extra $24,000 of Loon Lake, it wasn't required to pass that motion The balance wasn't requested at that time. So following that practice, this report was brought forward in the same way.
Thank you, CFO Fox. Also, just to clarify, the project costs for the renovations that we're talking about have already been approved and are already in the budget. We are simply paying them from one fund instead of from the original fund which was the COVID Safe Restart funding. So the actual amount that we're spending on the renovation project has been previously approved by the board in 2021. So this is not a new additional item. Director Thorpe, I'll add you to the list, and I see that CEO Hildebrandt would just like to speak to this.
Just a quick comment, and this, maybe Director Elliott can help me on this one, but this board policy has been in place for a long time. And we're simply following the policy. It is just a change from the budget proposal, going from one bucket to another, but this is a board policy that's been around for 20 years. Yeah. Thank you.
Next, I have Director Houghton.
Director Laird, I think, answered a few of my questions, but being a new person, since we've been on this board, since this new board started, we've approved some pretty hefty dollar projects to renovate our TNRD owned facilities. And don't get me wrong, I think they're great, but we as EA directors have also approached and been approached to help out our 10 area communities. And it seems like everything's on hold. We've been asked to approve all these mega projects, if you want to use that term, but us guys have got our hands frozen. And don't get me wrong, I support the library thing, but I also support the 10 EA directors that need to get on with their lives, which we were elected for, and that's to help out our communities. So as a dollar amount to go to these corporate building funds, is it just come from EA funds, or do the municipalities seated at this table contribute to that pot also? Those are the questions I had. Us 10 guys and gals want to get on with work, and the sooner the better. Thank you.
CEO Hildebrandt.
Thank you. So I think as Chair Roden said at the beginning of the session here, we want to have a fulsome discussion about this. We have been communicating this and talking about this for the last number of months. We plan on coming to the EA committee meeting, and I don't have the dates in front of me, but I believe it's March 9th. And it'll be a fulsome discussion on exactly all the details that we need to hear about. It'll then go to the policy committee for further discussion, further debate, and then it'll come to the board for a final decision. So this policy, as I mentioned before, has been in place for 20 years. We're following it to a T right now as we're kind of requesting this, but it sounds like there's some concerns that we need to take a look at. So we are moving as quickly as we can to address that with the EA directors and then take it through the proper process to ensure that the board is making the right decision. So we're not trying to slow anything up. We had said just a month ago that we were just pausing anything new, but as soon as we have these meetings, we'll get right back up to speed. The issues we're having right now are just some of the community projects that are coming in are great community projects. Don't get me wrong. The problem is managing those projects. We don't have staff to manage the projects, and we're also concerned about some of the liability issues with that. So we simply want to just renew this policy and make sure that everyone's comfortable with it going forward, and it lines up with our strategic plan, which will be up, coming up in the near future. So we are just trying to line things up to modernize this because it's been a long time since we've taken a look at it. But we are willing to work with the EA directors. We always have, and I always will.
Director Elliott. Oops.
Can you repeat the question for me?
Just like when we do these building renovation projects, is it just like these come from the 10 EA directors, or do the city accountants, the outside municipalities, do they contribute to things like the library? I'm a little unsure on how we fund all these things.
Okay, thank you, Director Houghton. The corporation makes those decisions. As it's coming from reserve funding that everyone in this room is a part of. So the EA director money that you're speaking of is just gas tax related. Everything else would have been in reserves through taxation and grants and all sorts of things over the years that have built up. That's where a lot of those projects are funded from. And that's contributed by everybody in this room.
I have Director Elliott.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I have a question. The pooled funds under the policy come directly from the 10A EA director. Am I right? Yes. How do you get it otherwise? Because there's no Canadian, that it comes from the gas tax. We 10 areas are the gas tax. We don't have anything to do with Merritt's gas tax. We don't have anything to do with Kamloops' gas tax. So if our pooled funds are within the EA's electoral gas tax funds, why is it that we would be paying the 225,000 for the libraries, which is in a building that's jointly owned?
CEO Hildebrand.
So the gas tax, like any municipality in this room, receive it as an organization. So the TNRD receives the gas tax, and the board at the time decided how they wanted to distribute that. And that went with 90% to the EA directors,
Yeah.
which is, and 10 to the pool fund, which is unique out of all 27 regional districts. We do that. And there's not a lot, I don't think there is any other regional district that does that, which is, it has been really good for us over the years. But the money comes to the organization, the TNRD as an organization, and then the board as a whole made the policy to.
Yes, I understand that. But what I'm saying is that that pooled fund is not contributed to by the municipalities. The municipalities have their own gas tax, and it might flow through the regional district. I'm not suggesting it doesn't. What I'm saying is that pooled fund, the 10% or whatever we put in there, is strictly EA funding for the reason that the staff or whatever needed to have some portion of that. But we don't have separate ability to ask the municipalities for a portion of their funding.
So the EA, so the gas tax comes into the organization. I hear what you're saying. But the board decides then how that money should be allocated.
Yeah,
And
except that we don't allocate it to the municipality. It's based on population. You don't give it to the municipalities, government does. Right?
Correct, right?
So we don't have anything other than the EA funding. And I also am concerned about that amount of money going to renovations of this building when I happen to know that this building is not owned by the TNRD. So where is our partner in putting gas tax money in to renovate?
Through the chair to alternate director Elliott. I'm not used to saying alternate director, I'm used to saying director. So my understanding is, as CEO Hildebrand was pointing out, is that it comes, like the gas tax funding is given as a lump sum to the TNRD as a regional district. And so other regional districts use gas tax funding differently than us. And CEO Hildebrand mentioned it, how we use it has worked for us. So other regional districts use it for regional services and regional infrastructure. And so this 10% pooled funding is meant for TNRD regional projects. And so the library is a regional service. So everyone here pays into the libraries because we have a number of library locations throughout the TNRD. And so that's why in checking with UBCM, the use of the funds for the library renovation portion was an eligible, would be an eligible expense. So I hope that kind of makes sense.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. And CFO Fox, did you want to say something?
Thank you, Chair. I think because I've come from 4 different municipalities with gas tax, I see the disconnect in my understanding. From my perspective, the gas tax is coming in to the TNRD. And as Mr. Hildebrand said, when it comes into the TNRD, it's not owned or belongs to the electoral areas only. And I think that the TNRD at the time put in a policy that the board all approved that allowed the allocation of the funds that way. And that is completely what we're trying to follow. Accessing the 10% that's allocated, as Mr. Hildebrandt said. But I would say that thought or feeling that it comes in and the gas tax is owned by the electoral areas is where I think the disconnect is coming in.
Thank you. I have Directors Thorpe, Stamer, and Director Laird. You have a supplemental or a new question? Okay, so Director Thorpe.
Hi, thank you. I'm just trying to wrap my head around it. So forgive me if I ask the wrong question here or don't word it right, but we've got 500,000 plus in this pooled fund, which is meant to be used for things that are used to benefit the entire region. Now, I've heard rumors that the roof needs to be redone. And my understanding was, I don't know where exactly I heard that, but that money was going to come out of gas tax funds. If we take half of this money that's sitting in that pooled fund and put it towards the library, where's the money going to come from for the roof?
Thank you, Chair. So I'm not sure any decisions have been made on where the funds will come from yet for the roof project. One of the determinations, it would have to fit within criteria. So Ms. McMillan might have to speak to whether that fits within the criteria, and that might be for another discussion. But what we have right now is 500,000 sitting in the pooled funds, 235 of it being used. So the remaining funds are open to still be allocated towards other infrastructure projects. That may be one that staff or administration feel like they would like to bring to the board, but I believe that still has to come to the board for approval.
So then you wouldn't, we're not going to, once we have this whole policy review done with the gas tax monies that go to the electoral areas, you're not going to then potentially be scooping funds out of that to pay for something like this? Like the roof, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's completely up to the board what they would like to do. We're not suggesting at all that the allocations that have been made to the electoral areas be clawed back or anything like that. I don't think that's where we're going. But what I would say is any change that is brought to the board, it's the board's decision on how those funds are treated going forward. I think from administration's perspective, as far as gas tax as a whole, there's a number of concerns that we would like the board to understand and try and help us administer this in a better way.
Director Stamer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, my question was around, there seemed to be, there's some apprehension behind the scenes in maybe the change in allocation to area directors from the gas tax, and staff is saying that 90-10 split has been in place all the time. And I just wanted to make sure that nothing had changed from what had happened in the past. And that was where my interest lied in those allocations, knowing that electoral directors have very limited resources for improvements in their areas. So from what I've heard, unless I've misheard that, is that nothing's changed in the formula. The formula still is the same as it's always been.
CEO Hildebrand.
Thank you, Chair. To Director Stamer, the policy is the policy, and we continue to follow it exactly as it's written. We'll bring it back with other ideas and options, and the board will decide on the future direction. And if I may, Chair Roden, there was another question that I didn't answer about the ownership of this building, because I've seen a few questions and a few eyebrows raised. The TNRD does own this building as part of a strata with city. The common areas are shared with the art gallery. We have 75% of that strata as a TNRD. So it is a TNRD owned facility, and we share the common space with the art gallery in the building.
Thank you. I have Director Laird, and then I have Director Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The discussion that I keep hearing is that the TNRD is unique as to how the gas tax or community building fund is allocated. I've talked to other directors from other regional districts, and the way their pool funding works, everything goes into a big pot, and then all the area directors have to fight or make applications and have it approved so that they can get projects done in their communities. The way our 10 area directors work, it's a large area. The other areas where they pool the funds they're fairly small area-wise. And what the gas tax allows the regional EA directors the opportunity to do is to improve infrastructure, buildings, like all the things that are listed as to what we can spend money on. And it's the only way that EA directors have an opportunity to support and improve our communities. And that's what it's called, Community Building Fund. And when I look and see what Director Graham and myself have done with our funds, we've partnered with the City of Merritt. We've partnered with doing the park. We're expanding the park. We're looking at, we support our community hall. It doesn't have any tax source. It's all volunteer. We make sure that it's looked after and it has the same opportunity and the same ability to have a decent facility like every municipality has. And this is the only way that we can fund this unless we go to the taxpayer and say, this is what we'd like to do in area M, and we'd have to increase their taxes. And the wording on their community building fund, we are doing that now. And I know there's issues around proper administration, and I think we can sort those out. But it's so important as area directors to have this funding to work on all the different projects. I fund part of our water district, and it's all included in what we are permitted to do. And it works very well. We don't go to any of the municipal governments and say, what are you doing with your gas tax? How are you spending it? You know, it's their decision on how they spend money on the funding. And I don't think we should change how we do it, but we'll have a discussion around that at our EE directors meeting. And I hope the board understands there's only 10 votes on the EE directors. Anytime this board wants to change how the EE directors administrator work in their EA areas, this board can basically vote any of our recommendations or requirements out. We can't outvote anybody. So we have to be cautious and make sure we do the correct things when we come to looking at redistributing how gas tax is spent. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Laird. Director Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one question that I heard Director Elliott ask, and I don't think it was answered, at least I didn't hear an answer for it, was when the gas tax comes from the federal government, the amount, whatever it is, 1.2 million, does that include the gas tax from the municipalities? Or is it just from the 10 area directors, from the 10 EAs? Because if that's the case, then that money, the 10% goes into the pool, does not include a contribution from any of the municipalities.
Just to answer that question, the allocations that are given to the municipalities directly are not part of the allocation that is given to the TNRD directly, in which then the policy supports allocating 90% of that to the EA areas.
All right, are there any other comment? All from the head table. All right, CAO Hildebrand first.
I'm sorry, Chair. We're speaking too much probably, but we want to make sure that the facts are out there. So I appreciate Director Laird's comments. We've worked with this program for a long time, but we also have 66% of this group is new. So in order to make good decisions, we need to make sure the entire board knows exactly what our financial situation is and how we're spending money. So that's one of the reasons why we're bringing this forward. We just heard here some information regarding how the gas tax is distributed, and it's based on population. So all the municipalities, they get their gas tax with that equation or that ratio with population. That'd be the same for every one of the EA directors as well. So based on your population, that's the percentage you'd get for your EA director funds. Did I capture that right? Agnes? And then 10% then comes off for that pooled fund. As per policy, the board policy. So I just wanted to clarify those comments.
And Corporate Officer Campbell, no? Mr. Vieira, no? Okay. All right, that said, we're going to call the question on the very lengthy recommendation regarding the Canada Community Building Fund reallocation. And this is a weighted vote. So if everyone again could please keep their hands in the air so that we can have the vote recorded accurately, and someone from the back will wave frantically when. Let's turn this on. Someone from the back will wave frantically when that weighted vote has been counted, correct? Uh-oh. Okay, now I'm worried. All right, so on the question, all those in favor of the recommendation, please raise your hands. All right, is it easiest if I name them off? Okay, Director Stankey, Director O'Reilly, Director Morris, Director Onslow, I'm sorry, mental block, Director Hall, Director Smith, Director Ranta, Director O'Connor, Director Middleton, Director Getz, Director Newstater, Director Bass, Director Frizzle, Director Hamer Jackson, Director Lepso, Director Stamer, Director Rain, Chair Roden, Vice Chair Smith, and Director Sarai, all voting in favor. Everyone, yay. All right. Voting against, please raise your hands. All right, we have Director Houghton, Director Hayward, Director Graham, Director Thorpe, alternate Director Elliott, Director Sow, Director Laird. Anyone else? That was 7, I believe. Mhm. And all the. I think this is the first weighted vote we've had where we've actually had to count. Isn't it? Those against, please raise your hands again. We have Directors Houghton, Hayward, Graham, alternate Director Elliott, Thorpe, Sow, and Laird. Okay, thank you. So weighted, we had 44 in favor and 7 against. Thank you. We move on to item 9.16, building permit activity highlights. This is for information only. Does anyone have any comments about this? Okay, we actually don't need to have a motion on that, but since we do, let's have a really quick vote. All those in favor? Opposed? That was a little palate cleanser, I think, that one. Thank you very much. So we move on to 10.11. Again, this is for information, so we don't need to have a motion on this, but I understand that Director Bass would like to say a few words about the Finance Committee.
Thank you. It was the first meeting of this committee. Following some of the comments from Director Laird, it was very clear. It was the clearest it was the first time I've actually understood the finances here. And we had hoped that we could have that presentation done to all of the board. However, it's going to be difficult, and I'm told, and you should watch, I'm told you can watch our meeting on YouTube. And it's a very detailed presentation from CFO Fox, followed by a very good presentation from Mario Perotti. And it really, I mean, I don't understand finances and I understood this for the first time in 4.5 years. And I think you felt the same way too, and you've been on longer. It was really quite a good thing. And I would encourage you all to watch it because you're going to have to understand all this stuff as we go forward. Otherwise, it was an interesting meeting and it wasn't very long.
All right, thank you very much. So if you go onto the TNRD's YouTube channel, you can look up the Finance Committee meeting, which has very interesting presentations by CFO Fox and by Carlo Perotti of BDO. Thank you. 10.12, Regional Solid Waste Management Committee. We do have a recommendation arising out of this committee.
Move the recommendation.
Thank you, Director Sarai. Do I have a seconder? Director Stankey seconds it. Certainly. Director Houghton, I gather you'd like to speak to this.
And I apologize, I wasn't able to make it to the solid waste meeting. We recently conducted a survey amongst all our residents, amongst our EAs and all our municipalities. I believe it was last night I got the results back. And on everybody's concerns in the communities that we serve. And a lot of discussion or a lot of recommendations were based around solid waste service within our TNRD. And the final results of that will not be done until February the 28th. So should we wait until our March meeting to adopt a level of service until we go over what the constituents said in this report of what they like to see done? Because it seems like we're putting the farmer style, putting the cart before the horse here. So that was my concern. If somebody could answer that. Thank you.
Mr. Vieira?
Yeah, through the chair to Director Houghton. I guess I'll back up and explain why we brought this to the committee at this time. We actually called this as an additional meeting of this committee because we are in the process of preparing the tender for the RFP for the 5-year contract for the solid waste operations. Our current contract is ending at the end of June, so we're already on a tight timeline to have that request for proposal issued. So the reason we brought this level of service to the committee and forward to the board now is to get the board to endorse our standard levels of service moving forward that we can build into the 5-year term. If there are changes that the board wishes to make, those still would be possible, but from a staff point of view, we need direction to kind of proceed with that request for proposal and have these levels of service adopted to be included in the RFP.
Well, then the question I asked administration, why did we go ahead with this survey if we're not going to look at the results constituents said in that survey?
Yeah, I mean, I guess generally speaking, that survey is related to the budget in general. But I would also say that we will still take on the solid waste side, we'll still take operational questions and concerns into consideration that we can implement into operations. So I would say that we will not ignore the results of the survey.
Director Stamer.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just wanted to make a point that I know everybody seems to want to try to expedite these meetings, but I think that as a chair of the Solid Waste Management Committee or any other chair of any other committee, I think we should have the opportunity to speak on whether we've had a meeting or not, and not just go strictly to a recommendation. I think that as a chair, we should have the opportunity to speak on what happened at that meeting, and then from that meeting, either move the recommendation or be able to discuss at that point. So I just wanted to make a point on that. Thank you.
Just a point, anyone at any point on any of these items can discuss it. And if I'm not leaving enough time, then I do apologize. I will make that more clear in my introduction of these items, that we do not need a motion to receive, but certainly I'm working on the assumption that everyone here will have read the report that is part of the agenda. And if anyone wants to comment on anything in any of those reports or has any questions or is seeking clarification, please absolutely speak up, put your hand up. And I apologize if I'm not making that clear, and I will attempt to make that clear and perhaps leave more than a split second before I move on to the next item. So does anyone else have any comments, as I say, on the report from the Regional Solid Waste Management Committee? If you have questions, comments, like clarification of anything, Now's the time. Director Rain.
Yeah, just a point of order. Are we receiving or adopting? Because in my mind, there's a difference here. Receiving it.
Through
Corporate
the
Officer
chair to
Campbell?
Director Rain. So when a committee meeting takes place, you'll see the committee minutes on the regular board agenda, just for the board's information. The committee is the one that actually legislatively has to adopt the minutes. With the regional, anytime there's a recommendation coming out of a committee for the board to approve, then you'll see that under the committee section. So that's what this is, the recommendation coming out of the Regional Solid Waste Committee for the board to approve.
Director Stammer?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And also for clarification, if you weren't at the meeting, there were some concerns around the levels of service, not only on the opening of the facility as what Director Houghton is and the hours of service. We went through all of that. Mr. Vieira was very thorough with what has been in the past and what has been requested and traffic flows and all those kinds of things. And it was a thorough meeting. The other thing is that we did have concerns on levels of service when it came to safety, whether it was ice removal, sand, that sort of thing. There's been some changes made in how the TNRD supervises those operations. And the biggest thing that I can take away from that meeting was the fact that, it's the largest budget that we have as a board. And we take that responsibility not lightly. And it's the focal point for most of our residents at what the TNRD is doing, because everybody uses the eco depots and our solid waste programs. And if you look at the survey that Mr. Davies just put out yesterday, you can see that those numbers are very positive. So thank you to Mr. Vieira and staff, because obviously it is neat and tidy and is being efficient. And we want to be able to continue that effectively and affordably, but making sure that we know that that's where most people go. And that's why we want to make it run like a fine-tuned machine, and it does. So I appreciate the staff on all the work that they've done. Unfortunately, as Mr. Vieira mentioned, the RPF had to be released when it did, and that's why we didn't get an opportunity for all of us to discuss the level of service. But I think we had a pretty good representation of the board at that board meeting, and I don't think there was any wholesale changes that we thought were necessary on hours of service and those kinds of things. I see that the East Lake residents are looking for a transfer station now, according to the survey. So I guess we'll see what happens in the future. But I thought it was a really good meeting, and please have a look at the minutes that came out, because we had a very good discussion. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Stamer. Is there any more discussion, questions, comments? Director Rain?
Just to follow up, I see we're saying we're adopting the level of service, but nowhere in the minutes do I see what the level of service is.
Is there a copy of that? Or is there a copy?
I mean, if we're gonna adopt the level, so I'm happy to have the committee make a recommendation to adopt this, but then we should have the information available to us on what we're adopting. At this point, we have no information on the level of service.
Sorry, Director Rain, I thought that we had linked the presentation.
Presentation of the documents not there.
Oh, yes, okay, good, yeah. Okay, it is, yes, it's linked in the minutes.
If I may, there was no wholesale changes in what we've been operating to date, Mr. Vieira, I believe. And again, one of the things that we brought up was safety on the site. That was brought up, and that staff is going to be doing a thorough review on all the safety measures that have been occurring to try to fix any deficiencies that are there. And I believe we also talked about some of the penalties that are involved when there's things that are there that aren't being tidied up in a period of time. Do you want to speak to that? Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Through the chair, I guess to clarify, the intent of it was, to create a standalone levels of service document, which we hadn't done before, that now we can attach that to the contract moving forward and build it into the request for proposal. And so what we presented to the committee, in which the recommendation is to adopt, was our current levels of service. So we went through it pretty painstakingly in the committee, of right down to hours of operation, locations, number of staff at each facility, level of service based on the size of the facility. And that was the recommendation going forward. And so to echo what Director Stamer said, the recommendation is essentially to carry on with the current levels of service provided at the facilities, and that we go out for tender procurement on that.
And if I may add, without stepping out of term, one of the things that was important was that we wanted to make sure that the new, if it was a successful bidder, was not going to be cost cutting, including wages. So that was important, that we made sure that that was not going to be, that was going to be basically guaranteed, if that's not correct, Mr. Barr. Remember we said that it had to be an acceptable level?
Yes, yeah, so I would hesitate to say they were guaranteed. What was built into the level of services, that those were be considered and evaluated as part of the procurement process. To ensure that and recognizing that they're important, valuable jobs in these small communities.
Director Sarai.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. Being on that committee, I remember discussing the service levels and the RFP expedite to get it done. But I also understand Director Houghton's concerns. We did a survey. Is there an opportunity in that survey, if there's something, do we get a 3-month review to bring something in that wasn't in the RFP that maybe sticks out brightly in the survey?
Yeah, through the chair. The process that we're at right now is we haven't released the RFP yet, but we're planning on doing that in short order with the coming weeks. We don't anticipate actually executing an agreement with a proponent for at least 6 weeks' time. So we would have time to make changes to that contract before it's executed if we need to with these survey results.
Thank you. Are there any further questions or comments on the recommendation, which is that the Board of Directors adopt the solid waste facility levels of service? No, the motion's already on the floor. So on the question, then, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Correspondence, action requested, Loon Lake Road Community Recreation and Agricultural Society. We have a recommendation to provide a letter of support. Director Laird, thank you. Director Houghton seconds that. Is there any discussion over their request for a letter of support? They are making an application to the Northern Development Initiative Trust. All right, on the question, all those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Item 11.1.2 to Kamloops to Secwepemc, request for a letter of support for the Paul Lake Dam Spillway Upgrade Project. Director Sarai, Director Ranta seconds that. Is there any discussion on this letter of support? See, Director Houghton.
Just that being in the ranching community, our dam safety is one of the most important things that has been brought to light since the big dam washout down in Oliver a number of years ago. And the more of these dams that we can get repaired, wherever the funds come from, I'm in full agreement. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Houghton. Any further discussion or comments, questions? Seeing no hands on the question, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? Thank you. That is carried. We have 2 items for information, although if anyone would like to speak to one or both. If you have any questions, clarification, comments on either of these 2 items, 11.21, 11.22. Director Houghton.
Thank you, Chair Roden. I congratulate Director Grenier and bring it to the board's table to get the province's attention to look at the road up in Tronquillo Valley, and it's one of the many important roads that do need a look. We got a letter back from the minister, and whatever happens, I think we've got their attention. I did second that motion with Director Grenier. We've got them to look at that road to try and make some improvements. And I know when we meet tomorrow, we're going to talk about other highway situations, but I congratulate Director Grenier and the staff and the directors for getting this going.
Thank you very much. New business, Director Thorpe has a recommendation, and that is that we send a letter of support to Thompson View Manor Society. Someone like
Second.
Director Laird, Director Samer seconds that. So we do have the recommendation that we send a letter of support to BC Housing. Anyone want to talk about this? Any questions? Director Thorpe, I thought you might.
Good guess. Thank you. Thompson View Manor Society currently oversees Thompson View Manor, which is a low-income housing for seniors and an assisted living complex. They're looking to add 29 units of affordable senior housing. Right now, they're waiting on BC Housing call for proposals. So basically what they're doing is they're putting all their ducks in a row. We need more affordable housing, and we have an aging population, which means we are going to definitely need more affordable senior housing. I think that this proposal benefits the entire area, and I'm hoping they're going to endorse it. Thank you.
Thank you. This would be 29 additional units to the 22 units that are currently there now. They're just on Elm Street in Ashcroft as you come down the hill, down 97C beyond the police station. I was able to see the plans at our Ashcroft Council meeting a week or so ago, and they're on 2 levels. And one of the appealing things about the proposal is that many of the units are 2-bedroom, which is in very, very short supply for seniors in our area. And 29 sounds like a lot. It is a fraction of what is needed, but it has huge community support, and not just in Ashcroft, but Cache Creek, Clinton, Spence's Bridge, the entire area. So areas E, I, and J definitely would benefit from having more space in Ashcroft, as people are more keen to age in place. If that means their home, that's ideal, but it can also mean in place in the community that they have often lived and worked in for decades. Any more comments? Seeing none on the question, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Is there any other new business? Oh, hands. All right, Director Middleton and Director Ranta.
Just for information only, but I don't know if you want to just acknowledge that we reviewed it for the minutes. It was the
It will be, since it is on the agenda, it will be noted that it was there on the agenda. Again, I'm assuming everyone has read it, and that if anyone wants to discuss it, then. So the acknowledgement that it's been reviewed is, I would take it, its appearance on the agenda.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So was that your new business? Oh, okay, that awesome. And Director Ranta. Thank you very much for bringing that to our attention, Director Ranta. Any other new business? Then we have question period. Anyone have any questions? All right, there's crickets in the gallery. So I will entertain a motion that we enter into a closed meeting. Thank you very much, Director Stamer. Director Ranta, did I hear you second that? Thank you very much. All those in favor? All right, and a 5-minute adjournment between this meeting and the next for those who need coffee or something else.